Hello, my name is Matthew Delorme. I'm from Cowessess First Nation. Today I am joined with one of our community's knowledge keepers of Cowessess First Nation to learn a bit of our nation's stories and histories. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself today?
Well, my name is Terrance Pelletier. My parents were Sidney Pelletier. Late Sidney Pelletier died in 1966, and my mother is Bernice Delorme. She married my pops Howard, and my papa just recently passed, and my mother passed about 10 years ago or so. So that's my family. I'm the oldest of 14 children, and we had all of us have gone to residential school when we were young, up to grade 8 down at Maryvale. So, and the other thing is that beside that experience in residential school, we had the big families, and my family was on Cowessess was Jay and Laura. And they were farmers on Cowessess, and so we have a rich history of farming in my family, including myself. And Jayan's dad was Zach Lara, and Zach was farming already in 1892 about. And so that's the history of my family here on Cowessess, and my other family, my mother's family, is from Cowessess. My grandparents over there was Alfred and Alice Francis, and the grandparent in our family, all of them, were very important, and so as a family, I think we remember that the most about our upbringing.
Yeah. So, as your family, was it a big family, smaller family? It was.
Well, all of my mother's sisters, there were just 7 sisters there. They all had big families too from Cowessess.
Yeah.
And so our family gatherings with our Cowessess families was always huge. It was a big gathering, and I remember gathering with about 40 cousins.
Wow.
Down in the valley, and because I remember I counted them, and I was the oldest. I was the oldest grandchild.
Nice.
So I had a lot more, a lot better upbringing, I would say, than my younger siblings.
Yeah.
Simply because I was the oldest and the firstborn, so I was treated pretty good by my grandparents, and I think all of us were. And so having a big family means that you have cousins to grow up with, and that's where we learn a lot about how to socialize with our families. We didn't really learn that much in residential school, but I couldn't imagine our lives without cousins, brothers and sisters and cousins from both Cowessess and Cowessess.
Yeah. So today we have some questions about personal experiences, community and culture, economic and social changes, and more. And what do you? First off, personal experiences. Number one, can you tell me about your earliest memories on the reservation?
Okay, well, we were raised. I was born in the winter of in the middle of winter, or the beginning of winter in November, and we had to go to. My mother said we had to go to Broadview by horse and wagon, horse and sleigh, and then when we came home in a bombardier. It's a big snow machine that runs on tracks, and it's covered, so that's how we got home. When we lived over there, just the same as everybody else on the reserve, we had to get water from somewhere, that came from the earth. And some people had wells, and we had a spring. And the spring was partways down the hill. And that hill was overlooking Horry's Crossing, as we see it. There's houses over there now, and our family doesn't live up there anymore. since our dad passed away in '66. At least not anymore. I went back and I farmed for 10 years or so there, same farm in the '90s. But when we were young, before I went to residential school, we had a mixed farm, and we had a lot of animals. We had horses. Everybody seemed to have horses back then. Even if they weren't farming, they needed horses to get around, go to town, and get from one place to the other. And horse and teams were common at the time. We had horses, and we had cattle, we had hogs, we had chickens, and we ate them. They raised them for food, and we had wheat and oats and barley. That's what some of it was fed to the animals. But at that time, there were still flour mills. There's one in Yorkton right now. It's becoming a museum or something. But there was another one in Esterhazy. And all the farmers, including my dad, would take wheat and oats to that flour mill and get sacks of flour and sacks of oatmeal made. And that was what we had in our house. And I remember big sacks of flour and big sacks of oatmeal in one of the back rooms. The other thing we had, and a lot of people had, was gardens. At least the farming people had gardens, big gardens. And in our log shack there, we had a hole dug in the floor. We had a wooden floor, and we had a cellar, and it was just dug out of the earth. And all of our garden produce, a lot of potatoes, but carrots and onions too, went in that cellar, and that's what we ate all year. And I remember one of my first jobs was to climb down into the cellar using a ladder and put some potatoes in a little bowl or something and bring it back up so that we could cook them. So that was interesting. We had rabbits running around, but I don't ever remember eating them. I think some people did eat them, but we had, we called them tame rabbits. There were black ones and white ones. We had a lot of fun because we had a big family. I had a lot of brothers and one sister. We were the firstborn, about 6 of us. We played around in the hills back there in the bush, and for some reason we were never scared of wild animals, and we never did see a wild animal. Today you see a lot of bear and deer, moose, elk. We never ever, growing up, I never seen a single bear in this reserve until I was maybe in my 50s.
Wow, that's amazing. So, how has life on the reservation changed since you were a child, from when you were a child?
Well, when we were kids here on the reserve, the families were. You knew who the families were. You knew where everybody's house was, and they were spaced out, and they weren't all together. There was no subdivisions at all. So every few miles was a house, and sorry, every few miles was a house, and every house had a lot of kids playing around in the yard during the summertime, and you knew all the moms in the neighborhood. I guess you could call it a big neighborhood, but your neighbor was about a mile away usually. And today, you have the subdivisions, which house a lot of people, and we have running water to most of the houses. And running water, why it's important, why clean running water is important to remember today, was when we were children, there was a lot of kids going to the hospital for something called Shigella. It's actually a diarrhea, and it's something that gets into your gut, and it just comes from not living in healthy conditions, it seems, or having clean running water. And so when you had to haul water all the time and heat it up and use it to wash dishes and everything else, cooking and cleaning up. And even though, you could keep yourselves reasonably clean, the kids always caught Shigella and had to end up in the hospital. And even when I was out there in the 1980s and I had my own children out there, it was exactly the same thing because we didn't have running water either. And we had to get our water. We had to haul our own water. There was nobody to deliver it. You had to haul it yourself. And so we lived like that out on the hill without any water coming into the house. And we'd haul it to wash dishes, flush the toilets, clean the house, wash kids, and do laundry and stuff like that, cooking. And it was the same thing. Kids were getting Shigella and having diarrhea and spending time in the hospital. And so that was, when in terms of development, it's a lot cheaper to keep kids healthy than to send them into the hospitals and to give them clean water. So the big investment then became putting clean running water on the reserve somehow. And that's why we had it, was because kids were just continually going to the hospital. It just was not clean in the houses. And some places are still like that, I think.
Yeah.
But and the other thing was we always had to chop wood for cooking and for heating. And that was something that was almost a daily job. So that was one of the things that chores that kids learned how to do right off. But when we were living out on that same hill when we were farming in the 80s, in the 90s, I think it was, when we got our TLE, Chief Lionel Sparvey Rook, they had some money in the trust, and they had put $400,000 towards getting the reserve what they call gasification. All of the houses on the reserve are connected to natural gas. And ever since then, I think we've had good, clean, reliable energy compared with before when we had wood, we had oil, diesel fuel, things like that, and propane. And they all stunk. Like your house always smelled like that. So now that's why we have good running water and nice warm heat coming into our houses.
That's awesome. So, what tradition, practices, or customs did your family follow when you were growing up?
Well, like I said, my dad's family was mostly farmers, but my grandma Hilda, which was Jan's wife, his wife, and that was my dad's mom. Hilda is the daughter of Pinizit and Earthman from Sakame. And they have a rich history coming from there. And she was a medicine woman, and she was recognized as a medicine woman by many, many people right up until she passed away in the late 1990s. I don't know if she lived to see 2000. But so she would come out once in the summer. My dad would go pick her up. She lived in Fort Capel. And she'd come out to the farm and walk along the hill. I remember seeing her walking along the hill, and she had a shovel and a stick. And she'd go looking for roots I see. I don't know. I was too young to know exactly what kind of roots they were. We always liked following her around. Well, because we tend to go exploring and stuff. But she collected roots there, and that's what she used for her medicines.
Oh, wow. So like rabbit root, rat root, and all that kind of stuff?
I don't know what they were. But I know that one time I got sick in my gut, and my grandpa sent me to her, and she gave me some like what you said, rat root or something.
Yeah.
And then I seen her again because I really had a bad stomach problems, and she gave me some tea for it, and it made me feel pretty good. So, but anyway, she was the one that practiced, and I know that she did because many people would still speak of her, and there's her family's history is written in the book Earth Elder Speaks, I think it is, Earth Elder Stories. So that was her family, and they were really strong into their culture. But the other one, I guess, the big influence from the Cowessess family was the Christian religion, and they followed the Protestant church over on Sakamay. Oh, sorry, over on Cowessess. Sakamay had a Protestant church too, the United Church. So, and the first time I remember going to the powwow was, well, you have to remember in 1960, Indian people were finally allowed to live, practice the same type of freedoms that other Canadians had, so they were able to leave the reserve. And powwows started coming back. And at a very young age, I remember visiting over at our neighbors, which was my late uncle, Harold Dora, and his family. And we were practicing powwow there when we were little kids. I was telling them that story. But we went to the powwow on Sakamay that time, I remember. And that's the first time that I remember going to a powwow. And I was thinking about it later. Maybe that was the first time they were able to have a powwow without being harassed by Indian Affairs, because that would have been the early 1960s. Remember, it was only in 1960 they were able to do a lot of those things.
So back before the 1960s, to have a powwow, you would get harassed by Indian Affairs?
I don't know, but that would seem to me was one of the lifestyles or whatever, the traditions that they wanted to stamp out, and for a while they did.
Yeah.
And whether they were actively doing it in the 50s, but you have to remember by then we've been in residential school for a long time. The families maybe have not as connected to the traditional beliefs, and maybe more attached to the Catholic belief. So, no, I don't know how much negative influence there would still be towards powwows at that time. But in 1960s, after that, for sure, we were able to gather like that and have a powwow. And I remember we went to Sakamay for that, and I don't know, we all got each $1 or something.
Yeah. And back then, $1 was lots compared to today.
Yeah, well,
$1 can't even get you nothing at all no more today.
Yes, and that's why all the parents made sure their little kids danced at the powwow.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I remember that. I also remember going to a feast, and I think it was on Sakamay. Cowessess.
Yeah.
But my other grandma over there, my Musham Alfred Francis, his mom was Sophie Francis, and Sophie was the daughter of Chief Cowessess here on he was their first chief.
Wow.
And that was his daughter. She married Francis over in Cowessess, and that was my Musham, we called him Musham Alfie, that was his mom.
Yeah.
And she was a medicine woman as well. I don't really remember medicine men so much, but medicine women for sure, to me, would seem to be they're more common than medicine men.
So it was the other way around back in the day. Today, you don't really hear or see anything here about medicine women anymore.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
So talking about culture and community, what can you share about the traditional ceremonies and celebrations in your community?
Well, I know, I talked with my I call him Musham Joe, Musham J. and Laura, And I was telling you, they were farmers, and didn't really have much for culture and tradition. I asked them once about, even treaty rights. What is treaty rights? Why are they important? What about hunting and fishing? He didn't know. He said if he had to hunt and fish for a living, he would have starved a long time ago. So that he was a farmer, and but it was towards the end of his life, in the late 69, 67, somewhere in there. I stayed with him for a time in my teenage years after residential school. And it was during those later years in his life, that he started embracing the culture a lot more. And it was at that time our late Chief Rook, Lionel Sparvey, he started the Crooked Lake Agency drum group at his dad's. That's where Sam Sparvey lives now. That house they just demolished, that was their house. And he started it at their house on one night of the week. I think it was Wednesday night or something. They'd have powwow practice, and that was when they got together with Bernard, Bob, and the Isaac boys over on the Chap boys. And that was where they practiced. We had little Edward was there because he lived right across that time. That's where Gloria Tim lives now. That was her dad, and he was one of the powwow group. And so my Wisham Jan joined that group, and they started going to the different powwows. And my mushum followed them, and so at that time I was helping out on the farm, but I had my driver's license, so I was able to. They got me to drive them to the powwows and stuff.
Wow!
And so at that time, to tell you the truth, we didn't have powwows up until Rooknam started the powwows.
Yeah,
and he was the one that started the powwow group as well.
Wow!
So I think they were. Not everybody on Cowessess had a residential school experience. Like Rooknam, they never went to residential school.
Oh, really?
So they didn't have that experience.
So it wasn't residential school. So like they would have went to day school.
Yeah, they would have went to day school,
okay.
And they would have had more of the influence of Indian people.
Yeah.
Not so much the church.
Yeah.
So if you were at the residential school, and the families that went there, and also the people that worked there, would have been more closely aligned with the church
yes,
sort of group, eh?
The church belief and all that, and
that's right. And so everybody else not so much, and so that was how the traditions come back. Was finally they were able to start getting together and planning their own activities and stuff, and then the powwows came back after that too.
Wow. So how has life on the reservation changed since you were a child?
I think. I have to say, given the remember we just went through COVID.
Yes.
And COVID, given that we were stuck at home, had no choice. We were entirely dependent on somebody from the outside for our well-being. Well, that meant our food, our water, our heat, everything that we needed for our physical well-being to live had to come from someplace. And I can tell you, for my entire life living on this reserve, I thought we were looked after pretty darn good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I am really, really impressed with that. And there's nothing bad I would say about how they looked after us at all.
Yeah. So like back in the day when you guys used to go for did you guys go to grocery stores as much as often, or was it mainly you raised your own food? You could.
No. After a while, we didn't farm because my dad passed away, and my mother. We had a lot of siblings, I guess. And
yeah.
So, and it wasn't just us. There was always big families, and ones that didn't farm. You had to live on welfare, I guess.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a very, very good living. I mean, when you live like that, the houses weren't good. We didn't have running water, and if at the most you might get 2 incomes in a month. One of them would be the social services checks you got, maybe every 2 weeks. And then the other one would be the family allowances.
Oh, wow.
So that would be all. And so it would be on those days that you got groceries.
Oh,
And
wow.
if you got groceries on that day, you had to hope it would stretch for
Yeah.
the next
Until you got the
grocery
next
period.
payment.
And if you can imagine having that many kids, and every house had that many kids, how much groceries you'd have to buy to last for 2 weeks.
So, like how it is today, you get a certain amount per kid. Is that how it was back in the day, or was it just one set rate back in the day?
No, now you get the family allowances that get now are a lot bigger.
Yeah, you get one big amount per kid.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back then you only got like $20 a kid, I think I remember. But it meant that the welfare had to pay for those kids now. So after they upped the family allowance, they gave the kids more money per child. They cut back on the welfare money for the families now, so they weren't getting that money for the kids. Okay, so now they got the bulk of their money from the family allowances once a month. So that turned out to be a pretty big check. But they get less when they were getting the social services.
So, I just went, I don't know how that happened, but I went back on my question there. We were in a different talks there. So we were talking about community and culture, and my next question was, how has the culture practices been preserved or have changed over the years?
I think they've got stronger, and I think they will get stronger. And it's unfortunate with the church, and it's not just on Cowessess, but I think it's global. I traveled in Ireland, and they had a very similar scandal with the church over in Ireland. And unlike the previous generations now, and I was over there, to study reconciliation. Unlike previous generations, the young kids do not go to school, do not go to church. They do not go to church at all, and they'll say, we're not going to church. In previous generations, they had to go to church.
Yeah, it was a must.
Yes, it was a must. No longer.
The
kids will just not go. I talked with a few of them, and they don't see that as an issue at all. They don't see that as anything that's important anymore. Probably because I think as a church, it's too bad. It's just my own feeling is, religion is supposed to be to impart some ethics on the people that are the believers. But when you have those types of scandals, then you're not attracting people anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and it's too bad, because we're not saying that the message is bad. And of course, some religions have taken it to the extremes. But if my one friend said, well, if you're talking about love thy neighbor, well, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But so when people don't no longer see the church as something that's in their lives, then they don't really have any way of how would you say, unless they learn it in school or from their parents, learning ethics for living, just good behaviors when you're living in society. The only other place we got that was from our culture and our traditions, because we had to grow up with that. We grew up knowing to respect. We didn't steal because nobody owned anything.
Yeah.
We didn't have to.
And everybody was close back in the days.
Yes, and so everybody depended on one another. So, those types of things, when we were practicing it, you didn't have to say, thou shalt not steal. Well, you just didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't have to say, honor thy mother or thy father, because you did.
Yeah.
Because that was just how you were raised.
Yeah.
There was no rules telling you, or written, or somebody making you do it. There was no coercion like that. You just did.
Yeah.
And so that was the difference between the cultural or traditional upbringings that was gone by time residential school came, and then we have the church, who we no longer see as a viable model for for leadership or anything. So I think that I was afraid that the young people now are not going to get any moral training or moral teachings. But when you're coming back to the traditions, and I see it a lot more, that, I think, is important, and it's happening more
Yeah.
now. And when, like, say, a generation ago, or my generation, doing Indian things was not really cool. You just didn't do it.
Yeah, no.
And but now, like I was talking with somebody, and we were saying, well, before, people who were protesting in the Indian side were usually the big shots, the politicians or the professors in the university, making the statements. But now it's everybody. It's just young people now are proud of who they are, and they're promoting themselves.
And standing up for what we believe in. Yeah.
So it'll never go back now. It'll never go back, and as long as they're becoming more aware of their cultural and their traditional histories, I think that that's a real positive for this generation, because it's moving upwards. When we were kids, none of that stuff mattered. Like when you went to the city back then, it was more likely than not you would fail, like for young people. Today, it's opposite, I think. I know we have really bad problems with some, like the addictions and stuff like that. I understand that. But I think on the positive end, the families are more determined to keep their kids away from that, and doing a better job of doing that. So I think that's good. But the problem with the other social problems that we have is a lot of it was related to poverty, and so that was the big problem when there were kids, is poverty.
Yeah, especially like in the early 2000s, poverty was a major thing, and they didn't like I noticed today's age, our First Nations people, our Indigenous people, we are starting to get well educated now finally,
Yes,
and
they're more accepted in the workforce. Back then, you weren't skilled enough to be in the workforce, and you really weren't wanted in the workforce. And I'm not saying everybody wasn't. I'm not saying everybody didn't make out some credits. Some people did very well for themselves, but like a lot of the young people without support, it was just hopeless.
Yeah.
So, and then the problem with that was, and why we started out with, how we ended up with such a huge gang problem, was when we left the reserve in the 60s. If you didn't have, if you weren't able to make it outside, they weren't ready for us. White people weren't ready for us. And not coming out of reserve with uneducated, without skills and things like that, you're just not welcome.
Yeah.
So when that happens in a society, whether it's with immigrant people who come in or a minority group, when they're shut out of the economic, of the economic workforce, they have to live somehow. And that's why they resort to criminal activity. That happened with the Irish people in the States when they came over, really discriminated against. So they start gangs. And the gangs in Regina would have only started out with families, one or two families. But it spread. And the reason that it spread was the governments at the time neglected all of the young people. All of the teenagers that were coming into the city, they neglected them into their early years, and that's where it was that neglect that led to this proliferation of gang members, to the proliferation of criminal activity. Because if you had one family, well, that one family is going to have 5 kids each, and those 5 kids each are going to have, and that's how it builds up.
Yeah, just ricochet. Yeah.
And so, but today, you think about it today, though. How is it different today? Today, we have Barry's down in the valley, for instance, running that, that labor.
Yeah.
He has that's important,
it
because
is.
them, young people coming of age, they need those skills to get out there and work, and they're welcomed if they have good skill. They can get a job anywhere, and good paying jobs too. And you don't necessarily have to go to university. So if you're a willing worker, you have good skills, you'll be able to make it now. And back then, that was what we didn't have. We didn't have a trained workforce. Now you have a well-trained workforce. They're getting paid to learn. They're getting good skills, and they're getting their driver's license at the end, and they can, get work clothes to go along with it and stuff. All of that type of things. That is just, that we take that for granted now.
Yeah.
Back then, there was nothing.
Yeah.
Not a thing at all.
Yeah. So, are there any particular stories or legends that were important in your community back then?
Well, we had, we didn't have really much contact with outside family up until 5 years of age, and then we went to residential school after that. So after that, my contact with outside of the family, with my grandparents and stuff, was kind of limited. Although it was quality time when I was with them, but it was limited, so we weren't seeing them all the time. So that didn't come out. And question again.
So it is. Are there any particular stories or legends that have important community back then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the stories, I guess, they're. I don't remember a whole lot, but I can tell you, give you an idea of the type of stories that we would have heard when we were little kids. Remember, we were living out on the farm by the hill, very isolated back then. The neighbor was like 3 miles away, and we were wandering around in the bush with didn't think twice of it in the summertime. But there was other times in the springtime that I grew up being very, very scared of bears. And I told you before, I'd never seen a bear until I was 50, but I don't know where I got this dread or fear of bears.
Yeah.
But I remember now, this one storyteller was reminding me, and they used to tell those stories to little kids in the springtime, because the bears are just now starting to get up, and they're wandering around looking for food, and they're hungry. So way back in the day, that was how you'd learn to, that's how you taught the little kids to stay in camp. Don't go out wandering by yourself. There's bears out there, and they're going to eat you.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the reasons why I was very scared of bears.
Oh, wow.
And so that was how they taught little kids to be safe.
Wow.
By telling them stories like that. But that was the only stories I remember from my grandparents.
Okay. So my next question. My next questions will be economic and social changes. Mm-hmm. How has the economic situations on the reservation evolved over time? Well,
on the reserve, we were farmers for the most part. That's why we came here, I believe, because this is really good land compared with Sakamay land for farming, and compared with Cowessess. This is good, solid land for farming.
Yeah.
So they knew what they were coming here for, and but they knew everybody had to have more than one skill, and at the time, you had to be a trapper, or you could be a trapper. There wasn't much to trap. I mean, by then you're stuck on the reserve, and the reserve really isn't that big. So there was still some people on the reserve that used to trap.
Yeah.
We had beaver, and I remember some in our house too, beaver and muskrat and weasels. So we had those hanging around. And the other thing, of course, was farming. So we were good farmers. I thought pretty good, really good farmers, best around here. And the other one was hunting. Trapping and hunting wasn't really much that we grew up on. And so it would have been just kind of like a sideline activity. there wasn't that, and from the stories that I heard from the generations before, farming being one of our primary industries out here, at least on Cowessess, people had to be good farm workers.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't farming, you were helping out on the farms, either on Cowessess or with the white people over here. So a lot of the older people, when they were young, they worked with the farmers out there across the valley and stuff like that. So those would be on the reserve the only types of economic activity you could participate in. You couldn't leave. And so if you weren't leaving, and you weren't a trapper, you weren't a hunter, and you weren't a farmer, there wasn't very much left for you.
Yeah.
And, at the time, the band office didn't employ anybody. So back then, since you couldn't leave the reserve, if you wanted to leave the reserve for a better life, but get a decent house and maybe a chance of having a job, you had to sign off the reserve. You had to enfranchise. Those are the ones that came back after from Bill C-31s.
Yeah.
They had to leave because there's nothing here. If you want a better life, you have to go somewhere else. So they were signing off the reserve before 1960. That's the only way they could leave. And when I was looking at the Indian Affairs reports, there's a lot of letters being written by individuals asking the Indian agent to take them off the list and to give them a letter to say that they could leave.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're kind of sad stories. So, and then after in the 60s and 70s, activity at the band office was starting to pick up. So the band office was usually the only place that you could have a job, which is a government job, which is essentially, just an office worker. And for the longest time, that would have been it.
Yeah.
Everybody's waiting around for their turn to get hired on with one of the positions at the band office because that was all there was.
Yeah.
All there was here at the time. So for the longest time.
So mainly the main jobs on the reserve was pretty much farming, hunting, trapping, the band office.
In the band office, yeah. And they didn't make much of a living hunting and trapping or fishing either. So, and that was it.
Oh.
That was how, and if you couldn't leave, you can see how people became dependent.
Yeah.
Because you can't leave.
No.
And if you can't work, how are you going to live?
Yeah.
So the monthly check from social services is the only way that kept families going.
Wow.
And why? Because they had to stay on the reserve.
No other choice.
No choice.
Yeah.
Or else sign off, give up your rights and leave.
Yeah. So how has the social structures within the community changed?
Well, it started out before... in the 60s anyway, that I remember, the families, I don't know how to say it, but you knew who they were.
Yeah.
Okay, my family was the LaRoz. There was another, the Lorne families. There was the Lavallee families, the Pelletier families. There have been about 3 different families. But you sort of all knew everybody. You knew who so-and-so was.
Yeah.
And all of their kids, you knew all of them. And today it's not like that anymore.
No.
I don't know who lives.
There's 4 or 5 different DeLorme families now, and
families is the same way.
Same, it's the Redwoods, the Lavalleys,
the
LaRoz,
So they're huge families, and they all became very spread out. I guess. And so I don't know who people are anymore. And I know with my grandchildren, I have a Tanner, a Redwood.
So my next question is relationship and identity. How has the relationship with neighboring communities or other reserves changed over the years?
Our neighbors were Sakme and Kakwistahow. And because I had relatives on those reserves, I at least was able to... I spent a lot of time on Kakwistahow with my grandparents over there. And so did all my cousins. And And then we had, well, like my grandma's family was from Sackme. We didn't have too much contact over there, but their families was Sangwish. And there was an elderly fellow over there. His name was Moses Sangwish, and his family. So, and he was always very nice. He used to call my mom my girl, and because Pinizit, or Earth Elder, him and it was his 5 brothers were the ones that settled over on Sackame. So Sangwish is one of the relatives. So one of my grandma's relatives, my grandma Hilda, and so that would be one of her uncles or her mushrooms or something. And so they were always very, very kindly towards us, and they attended the Protestant church over on Sackame as well. The Cowessess was, as compared, I think, maybe with Cowessess in terms of farming and development. Cowessess had the residential school and the only school on the 4 reserves. So a lot of their kids had to come over here or else go to Labrat. And so they had their own school over there. I can't remember what it was, but some of them came over here. But it would seem that it wasn't until considerably a long time after we were developed, they were just starting. The first major development they had out there when I was a teenager, finally in the 60s, was what they called the village. And that's where well, it's right off the highway there. That's their first settlement. It was houses built in one big circle.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was the furthest east they went at the time. I don't remember they had going that way, at least by, they built a road back then. So they were starting to have roads. And then they put that big highway right through the reserve. So, like I said, it seemed like they were slow in development because they weren't farmers or anything like that.
Yeah.
But you can see them now.
Yeah.
Like
they're pretty big now.
They're
Yeah.
pretty big now. Sackame, I always thought was the same way. But, you know, them too. They were, we're a big band.
Yeah.
And they're a lot smaller bands.
Yeah.
Most of them, eh?
So was back in the day how you were saying if you wanted to live off the reserve, you had to sign off, give your treaty rights. But were you able to go from reserve to reserve without no problem, no hassle?
I wouldn't know that. I know that because we had families, like a lot of the families, like the women, like a lot of the moms, they come from other reserves. They come from Muscopeding. My mom is from Cowessess. They come from Ochapways. Like the women came from those reserves.
Yeah.
And so Cowessess always had connections with the nearby reserves, all the way down to Carlisle too. So they had family connections all the way along. And exactly how they would have visited one another, because you know they had to meet people. Maybe they met in school or something, but the only other way to get around it was either by horseback or walking.
Yeah.
So I guess you could do that.
So what does being a member of your tribe mean to you personally?
Well, I like being from Cowessess. We're huge. I think that the people that we have living with us are quite dynamic, meaning that things happen, like you can make things happen, and good things.
Yeah.
Right now there's a lot of activity on the reserve with the staff, the programs, and the services. A lot more diverse, I guess. Trying to at least take care of things now.
Yeah.
And because we can, and maybe you know, we're just starting out. Maybe some things we'll learn to do better over time, or maybe something's not working, we'll fix it up. But I mean, we're doing a lot, and I'm really impressed with the people, not just the leadership, because the leaders, they have to be there, but it's the people that make things happen.
Yeah.
When we have a significant amount of activity on the reserve right now, the chief has all of us, all of the people working pretty well, and we're all working towards a common goal. And one of the big reasons for it is that us two will be getting a large investment in land claim money for individuals and of course the band, and we're hoping that some of the programs that are being developed will help the reserve to prepare for that influx of money.
Yeah.
And help the young people to have a better mind about themselves when they do get it. I know I'm hearing stories from out of Alberta, for instance, when they get the cows and plows. The young people out there it's just a big a crisis when it comes to drug abuse. When they get that money, and that's one of the things I think the community is preparing for. But that in itself, I think, is far-sighted enough that we're hoping to have some meaningful impact into the families and their development in the next few years, and of course, because whatever we went through in our generation, like for hardships when related to money and otherwise housing, I don't think the next generation will have that problem.
Yeah. So for another, so I have a question for historical events. Can you describe any significant events that have impacted the reservation during your lifetime?
During my lifetime. Well, the land claim, I worked on the land claim. I finished university in 1993, and immediately in January of 1993, I started working for the Reserve on treaty land entitlement. That was complete in 96, and but that in itself, although it did mean we settled the land claim, and that was good, but the most meaningful one was, part of it was we had to find out where our band members lived, and there was only 200 and some that lived on the reserve. We had 1,600 voters we had to contact, and out of that 1,600, 800 had to vote yes. So we only know where 200 are, and on the reserve. And so we had to start getting people to remember where their families were, who lived here, who lived there. And we had, everybody was handing in stuff. They'd come in, if it was written on the back of a cigarette box or on a piece of paper, and so... so I was the one that was in charge of trying to make contact with them. So we started out, when we got the first group of addresses, we got a lady by the name of Saint Germain. I can't remember her name. She was one of our band members, and at that time, computers were not.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I was just gonna say that. It's like that must have been really hard trying to figure out where all our membership was, because back in the 90s there was no computers, there was no internet,
they were just starting to come out. She was trained. One of the first ones trained on a particular program.
Windows XP probably.
and so she designed a program where you could tell the last name or the first name, middle name, then their street numbers and address, the city they lived in, and the province.
Wow.
So we started breaking them all down by province, cities, and all of that. And so the first round, we managed to go across Canada. The first time we went across Canada, we do it all the time now. Me and Hubert Gunn had to go, and so I advertised in all of the major cities, the ones we go now: Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Regina, and Winnipeg.
Yeah.
So I put a big ad in the paper. Everybody from Cowessess, come and meet me on this certain date.
Yeah.
That was the first time we did that. And then we went into Ontario, went to a number of smaller cities in Ontario, met some down in the south there, in Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, Kenora, and Toronto, and then Ottawa as well. And so we rounded up our people that starting like that, went into the States, got a few more down there. And by Christmas of '93, we sent out our first newsletter. I wrote, the chief signed it, Chief Laval signed it.
Yeah.
I was the one that wrote it up because we had to present some kind of ideas.
Yeah, I was just going to ask who the chief was back when that.
So we outlined what we were planning on for the new year for '94, and we mailed that at Christmas time.
Yeah.
That was the first mail out we had, and we were using our new program to send it all out. And then when we had so many mail outs because there's no email.
Yeah.
So we had so many mail outs, and at the end we had to send them all each a mail-in ballot. So everybody got a mail-in ballot that was on the list. I had to find as much people as we could. I think we found 1,400.
Wow, that's amazing.
And 1,100 voted.
Oh, so more than what was expected.
Yes, 800 more than
wow.
what we expected. And so that was the first time we went out, and after that we maintained contact with them ever since. And you know, the significant thing about that, I seem to me, I think her name, it's not Roberta. Roberta St. Germain is her sister. I can't remember her name. I'm really sorry about that, because like you said, I knew what to do. Yeah. But I couldn't make the computer do it. Yeah. Nobody did. It just happened. We hired her that summer, and she put it together.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just perfectly. It worked perfect.
So my next question is for education and language. What was your experience with education on or off reserve?
Well, we went to residential school, of course, at Marival, and however residential school, they say residential school that's how it was. But we'll be looking at that a bit more closely, I think. But after that, you either went to Lebret or somewhere else. Yeah. And so a lot of people went to Lebret. But when it came to us, they started sending us to Yorkton. And there was a St. Joseph's College. It was a Ukrainian Catholic college. And so it was residential school, too. So we went there for grade 9. I didn't make out it. You can't send a 13-year-old kid to a city unsupervised without parents and expect them to make out. You know, that's ridiculous. Yeah, you never do that. No. So of course, never. I passed. Then we came and went to Broadview for a year. They're busing the kids from the reserve to Broadview, and then from there on, Melville, I think, opened their brand new comprehensive high school there. It's there now. And we were one of the first students that went there. So we had a bus that they were taking us from grade 10 to Melville. Yeah. And I didn't make out very well in my teenage years, and this and that come up, and I took off, and I finished my last grade 11 classes in Calgary.
Nice. Wow. So my next question is for hopes and concerns. What are your hopes for the future for the reservation and its people, for Cowessess?
Well, whatever I hope for, I think it probably is going to come true, and that makes me very happy. So, I have a very positive view of what's going to happen, of our future. At one time, I would have been, concerned about it, but I think if we keep up with good leadership, and I think we do, and we keep up with the families all pulling together. I know everybody thinks we're always scrapping. Well, maybe we are, but I mean, we still pull together. Yeah. And if you looked at say the two floods are very good examples in the pandemic. You know, how we looked after ourselves. The two floods, it was us. It was the families who worked on those floods. You know. Every family we put a shifts together, family shifts. So a family would go take their turn here at a certain time, and other families would take over here, and that was how they put the shifts together to work on the dikes when they were putting up dikes. Yeah. So those things I think we do really well. We'll have a lot more, resources, money and other things that we could have a good development with good leadership. And I think that our future is very, very positive. And I'm hoping that the young people will
Yeah, that was my question. It was how can the younger generation contribute to the community's future?
well, I think more they're becoming more interested in the cultural part of it, I hope. I think that education is always an ongoing concern, whether it's here or somewhere else. You know, that's a very big important part of a young person's life. So if they're able to, you know, somehow get through their training, you know, their education and training, you can finish your grade 12. You can you can do just about anything.
Yeah.
You know, now before you had to apply and now
And hope you get in and all that.
Yeah, all of those things, you know. And so I think that their future is very bright, but they've got to get educated. They've got to get some skills and some training into it.
And set their mind to it.
Yeah, and I think so. There's a lot of young people now. Like there's good families, so they're bringing up good kids.
Yes.
And so I think we have a positive future. Positive future.
So we are getting close to the end here. I have 2 more questions left. It's under advanced and wisdom. Advice and wisdom. So what advice would you give to the younger generation about preserving their heritage and culture?
Well, we need to have more involvement. I think from our youth, when they're in school, we're having a lot more, I think, cultural training. I haven't been down there lately, but they do a lot more activity with the kids in the valley. And just by participating with some of the activities, you know, you learn to develop social skills. And that's some of the things that, you know, our young people need is to develop good social skills to get along with people and learn how to problem solve and work with other people. And when we're talking about culture isn't a thing that one person has. Culture is a group activity. You have to have people to have culture. There's no way you could have culture on your own. And people would say that, well, what is civilization? What is it, civilization? You might say, well, we have all this high-tech stuff. You can fly to the moon and wherever else. But our civilization starts when we start looking after one another. You know, people figured out right from the beginning, if somebody in your family is hurt, you're depending on those people. You're depending on them for hunting, or you're depending on them for looking after the kids, or you're depending on them for the knowledge that they have about the land. So you have to look after those people. And so the survival skills that they developed was our culture. They learned how to care for one another. And all of the skills and abilities that they had were developed out on that land so that they could harvest it and help one another to get by. So when we're here on our reserve, culture is something that we have to practice and develop. It might not look like it did a couple hundred years ago, but it does. It needs to look like a group of people who are working together, you know, to promote themselves, to promote their community, to promote their families, and you know, and to have a stable life. That's the biggest things they don't have right now. You know, stability. So the future, I think that's what it is. Mm-hmm. I think you need.
Awesome.
If we're all able to look after ourselves, that's civilized.
Yeah. So my last question is: are there any lessons from your life that you would love to share?
Well, the one thing when young people leave home is the biggest challenge, I guess, they might face, depending on how much support they have.
Yeah.
Some people have good support. Young people have good supports. But even with good support, you know, some people are. I know I do a lot of work with other communities in their schools, a lot of schools, many schools. Talked with many parents, many grandparents. You know, they're scared for their kids to leave home. they don't want them to go to the cities because, of the types of influences that they have over there. Once they're gone, they don't have any influence over their kids, and not daily influence anyway. So and even if they try to stay away from the bad side, there's always people around that'll always come and find you. There's at least for Indian people. So they're scared to send them to the cities because of the different influences and dangers, I guess, they might face. So those types of challenges, I think, when young people are finally leaving home, are leaving the reserve, are leaving high school, it's going out there and starting to make good decisions for themselves. And kids do. Not every kid is doing drugs. Not every kid is messing up. And I think that things like sports, all of those types of activities, those are nice, good, healthy activities. And the more the community supports those types of activities, the more they'll be interested in it when they're going to the city.
Like our winter, summer games.
Exactly.
And all that.
All of those things, all of those healthy types of activities. Because if you go to the city and you see those bag numbers, I always say, those are little skinny guys, know. And but when you see our young, healthy people playing baseball, those are well-developed men.
So like me, I was an urban person all my life. I lived in the city from when I was a baby growing up. I grew up in the city. I didn't know what winter or summer games was. I was always into track and field and that in the city. And now that I'm older, I moved back to the reserve. I'm loving it. I have my own kids now. I have 3 kids, and that's what I'm trying to push for is their culture and their culture in sports.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot of our young people are. Like last year at the powwow, we might have had negative publicity about the residential school, but in a sense, that's what brought a lot of our people back. And those young people, they're looking for their culture, trying to find something different than what's out there for them, And that's good. They're coming home to look for that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that they'll find it in the cities. But like I said, it's leaving home or leaving your community the first time and going to be by yourself.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
that thing is important.
So I just have one more question for you. We had an elder in here a few days ago, and she said something. I don't know if you ever heard of it. There was lambs back in the day called bitch lambs.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it.
Well, I could show you what there is. We used to, and I still do. You shouldn't pour bacon grease down the sink; it plugs up. So you save it in cans, eh?
Yeah.
And yesterday they were trying to light the fire with wet wood, so I went and poured a bunch of bacon grease over the top of it. Of course, it puts big black smoke, but at least it starts the fire.
Yeah.
Well, so I could do that, make what you call a bitch lamp.
Yeah.
You just take rags, about 2 or 3 knotted pieces of rags, and you braid it. You braid it into a little rope,
Yeah.
And then you soak it in that oil, that grease.
Yeah.
And then you put that grease in a flat plate.
Yeah.
And the wick sticking out, and you light the end of that wick.
That's
a bitch lamp.
Okay.
and it'll stay lit, but it's kind of a last resort if you ran out of coal oil or something and you needed a light in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it's something
that just gave you a light.
Yeah, it was a free light. Yeah. Well, that's the end of our little podcast journey. I'm Matthew DeLorme and
Terrance Pelletier.
We'd like to say have a great day, guys, and thank you for listening to the story.
Thank you again.